Welcome to the Unstoppable Real Estate Agents Podcast. I'm your host and real estate productivity expert, Kim Hughes. Join me as we focus on real strategies and implement real solutions designed for you to achieve major success in your business and life while getting you organized. Hi, everybody. Today we have Lucy Hebron, who is an attorney here in Mineola, Texas. And she and I have known each other probably around 30 years. And she has owned her own law firm. She has also been a county judge. And then now she's back into private practice. And she is my yoga partner as well. So when we were at yoga about a month ago, we
Yep.
were talking, and then you asked me if I knew about this particular CTA, and I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And that conversation went pretty deep within just like 3 minutes. And then we had to start the session and we never picked it up. But I thought this is so important to get it out to not just real estate agents, but if you're an entrepreneur, this applies to you. You don't have to be a real estate agent and think, oh, well, that CTA does not apply to me because I'm not real estate. This applies to every small business, every entrepreneur. And I'm going to kind of turn this over to Lucy because this is her area of expertise. So what she's going to do is explain to us what CTA means, what the requirements are, what the deadlines are, and all the things that we have the questions about. I don't think a lot of people are talking about this right now. So I really am going to encourage my listeners to listen, save this podcast, revisit it. And if you know a small business owner, don't care what business they're in, forward this podcast to them, because this is probably going to be my most important podcast that I've done in the year that I have had a podcast going. So we're going to talk about the Corporate Transparency Act, which is called a CTA in short. So Lucy, I'm going to turn this over to you, but at first I want you to give everybody a real in-depth background of you so that they know that, this is the real deal and this is something serious to take, and it's coming from somebody who knows what they're talking about.
So
So
thank
there
you.
you go.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks for asking me. It's a pleasure to visit with you and your listeners about this very important act. You're absolutely correct. This is a monumental, big law for small businesses of every type. Um, did you tell me you want me to give a little bit about my background and
Yeah.
my experience and everything? So I've been a licensed
Yeah.
attorney since, oh gosh, more years than I want to count. Over 30 years, I've been licensed to practice law in the state of Texas. A little disclaimer for listeners who are not in Texas, make sure you consult the laws in your own state. This
Mm-hmm.
specifically is going to apply to Texas as well as the federal statute, but I've been practicing business, bankruptcy, general practice, as most attorneys do in a small town. And I started my career in the big city of Houston, Texas. Practiced there right out of law school, went to the University of Houston Law Center, and then got my first job. Worked on the 37th floor of First City Tower building in downtown Houston, and went from that to one block from the Mineola Dairy Queen in Mineola, Texas. Several years later, as you know,
Yep.
we moved out here to the East Texas area about 30 years ago to start a family. My husband took a job here, and I set up my own shop where I began to. I never had this in the plans to start my own law firm, but it just sort of happened. And I did
Mm-hmm.
that off and on for the last 30 years. I do entity formation. I do a lot of business formation, business monitoring. Um, Bankruptcy is my first love. General practice, probate, and estate planning. But I've also been a county judge, as you mentioned. I did that
Mm-hmm.
one term as a county judge here for the good citizens of Wood County, Texas, which was a wonderful experience. But actually helping people with the law and their legal problems is what I like to do the best.
Yeah.
I also teach at the local college the junior college, Tyler Junior College. I teach professional
Mm-hmm.
ethics in the paralegal program there. And I just recently finished my first book on bankruptcy. So I am a little bit versed in the law, and I, like your listeners, don't like the color orange. And I want to make sure that I follow the law. And you probably know this. Ignorance of the law is no excuse to anything. So I thought this is
Yep.
something that everyone needs to know, not just my clients that I've advised over the
Mm-hmm.
years, but everyone who's an entrepreneur or who has a small business, an LLC or a corporation. This is going to affect you. This is the single biggest piece of legislation that's going to affect small businesses in about 10 years. And it applies to whether you've got an old LLC or a corporation that's been kind of hanging out, you parked it somewhere and you haven't done anything with it, to people who have active LLCs or corporations, as well as to those people who may think about incorporating next year in 2024. And there's 3 sets of deadlines that you need to be conscious of, depending on the type of entity that you have. But the Corporate Transparency Act, in a nutshell, this was Congress's response to trying to combat anti-money laundering. It's their attempt to weed out the bad businesses from the good businesses. Just like you remember 9/11 when all things changed as far as airline security. They dumped all of us
Mm-hmm.
into the same pot. Everyone had to go strip there, take their shoes off and everything, trying to weed the good out from the bad. This is basically the
Right.
same thing. It is now requiring all of us who have an LLC or a corporation to basically prove that we're legitimate, so that they can go after and cross-reference the money launderers, the traffickers, the illicit businesses who try to do business in our country while hiding behind an LLC or a corporation. So that is the crux of CTA, the
Mm-hmm.
Corporate Transparency Act. In one fell swoop, they have passed this legislation, and we're now going to all be subject to it. Good, bad, and the
Yep.
ugly. It's a
And
massive
that it's
effort.
kind of, it's kind of frustrating because it's always like, in my opinion, that the good people are paying for the bad people's mistakes. It's like the good people who always try to do the right thing, live by the law, pay their taxes, do everything right, then we're the ones that end up getting, excuse my language, screwed at the end of the day. And so this is another, like you said earlier, what was this? A Christmas present from the federal government.
That's right. Merry Christmas to all you businesses and entrepreneurs out
Yeah.
there. Coming soon, January 1st,
Yeah.
2024.
So if you would explain, if, when you say it's an LLC, there's different corporations that you can file. So is this going to just affect an LLC, or does it affect like other like, what is it I'm trying to think of? Like,
PLLCs.
yeah.
Yeah, so it affects any entity that has to file in a state to begin its official legal formation, whether it's an LLC, a single member LLC, a professional LLC, um, any type of corporation. And I'll talk about the exceptions to that. But for the most part, if you are a business, and particularly a small business, you are going to be subject to the act, whether you are exempt or not, which means if your entity is still in existence and it's still a legal entity, even though you've had it on the shelf and haven't done anything with it for years, you're going to be subject to this reporting requirement, like it or not.
Okay.
Even if you claim an exemption, you're still going to have to jump through the hoops to comply with the filing requirements. And at the end of the day,
Right.
the whole point of this is to create a massive federal database that will tell the Department of the Treasury, the federal government, law enforcement agencies, and banking institutions, who is it that's doing business in the United States. If you're a beneficial owner, or you own 25% or more of an LLC or a corporation, you have to disclose the background information that we're going to talk about in a minute. This is going to really, like I said, it's going to have so many far-reaching effects on people. And if you're like me, I don't look good in orange. I know you don't look good in orange. Nobody looks good in orange, but you're going to have to file this report one way or the other. And the penalties are not mild. We'll talk about them in a minute. But if you're like
Okay.
these people, you do not want to get a letter from the IRS talking about an LLC or a corporation, even if it's defunct and you've had it inactive. So we're going to talk about some of the steps your listeners are going to have to take in order to get off the IRS's radar.
Okay. So let me ask you this. If you have an LLC and like you said, you've had it on the shelf, you haven't touched it, you just created it, and then life got crazy and you just went, oh, I'll deal with that later. They will still have to pay this fee. But if they have not done anything with it and they don't plan to do anything with it, can they just close it out? And or is there a procedure that they go through to close it and to avoid that fee?
Absolutely. So if you have something that's been sitting on the shelf, that's what I'm advising my clients to do. If you have something
Okay.
that's been sitting there for a while, you're never going to resurrect it. You haven't done any business in the last couple of years. Why keep it alive? Just go ahead and
Mhm.
do what we call in the legal world, just kill it, tank it. Just as you had to go file something with the state to form that entity, you need to go to
Mhm.
the state and kill that entity, file your certificate of dissolution, get rid of
Okay.
it. Not only do you want to kill it, but then you're also going to want to notify the IRS that the entity is no longer in existence and give them the employer ID number and let them know, hey, this is no longer an active LLC or corporation. And furthermore, we're no longer going to be using this EIN number because that's how they're going to cross-reference everything. And you sure as heck
Okay.
don't want to be hanging out there and even have to file this report if you're not really planning on transacting business in the future or
Mhm.
resurrecting this entity. But
Okay.
that is one of the tips I was going to give for your listeners at the very end. um, if you're like a lot of people and you're a serial entrepreneur, maybe you've got lots of little things that you've started over the years and they may be hanging out there. You may have forgotten. I would encourage your listeners to go ahead and call their Secretary of State's office here in Texas. I know the number by heart, 512-463-5555, and ask if your entity is still active and on the registry as an entity. If they tell you it's there or inactive and it's still on file, by all means, go file your certificate of dissolution and end it so that you're not
Okay.
on the IRS's radar. And I
Okay.
know I keep referring to the IRS, but let me tell you the name of the entity that's going to oversee this whole thing. It's called FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. FinCEN is going to be, it's already operating. They're the ones that watch the bad guys and the money launderers and the traffickers and all that. But FinCEN is the one that's going to oversee this reporting requirement pursuant to the Corporate Transparency Act. They're going to require everyone to go online. If you're subject to the act, you have to e-file this report. It's called a beneficial information report. Beneficial information report. Yeah, the BIR is
Mhm.
what's going to have to be filed in order to comply with the law. And the report, we're getting into the reporting requirements now. The report itself, this is the crazy part. You know how if you're representing a client like we do, I'll go online, I'll file their certificate of formation. We'll file their statement of their registered agent if we need to change or update. We could do all that online through e-filing. And I file it on behalf of my client. With this new requirement under the CTA, even the person who submits the information to FinCEN has to themselves supply all their identifying information: name,
Oh, wow.
address, birth date, social security number, residence address. So it's all one big cross-reference database of the pertinent information required so that the government can track the bad businesses from the legitimate business.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So if I own an LLC and I have, say, 3 people on my board, the LLC has to pay the fee, not the 3 board members, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
If your board members own 25% or more of your LLC, or they are what we call people who have substantial control in your LLC, that would be an officer, a director, or a manager. Anyone with substantial control or 25% interest has to be on that report, the BIR, that you will file on behalf of your LLC.
Okay. So we need to make a note of that. So then when you are filing this, okay, so do you need an attorney to do the paperwork or does your CPA do the paperwork?
That is a great question, and I'm sure one that your listeners are going to want to know. My first thought would be contact your CPA if he does your business filings already with the state. Your CPA could do it. Your attorney could do it. There are outfits online. I watched a podcast the other day of some outfit that's offering to do it for $200. They will get the information from you, but then you have got to feel comfortable with turning over this very confidential information to this entity on the internet to make sure that they get things filed for you. So we're going to recommend that you stick with your CPA if your CPA is going to do it, and or your attorney. Because I don't know if we talked about the exact reporting requirements, but it's not only the name of the entity, it's the doing business as name, it's the EIN number for the entity, and then it is the information, the personal information of those 2 categories we talked about: substantial control person or beneficial ownership, 25% or more. You've got to list their names, their birth dates, their social security numbers, their residence address, and then what type of, are they a beneficial owner? What's their capacity with the LLC or the corporation? Does that make sense?
It does. And it's crazy.
And passport. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yes.
This is crazy. Okay. So let me ask you, let me just confirm what I just heard. So if I am not an LLC and I just filed a DBA with the state, the DBA still has to pay that, right?
No. If you are an LLC, any type of limited liability company, or a corporation. So in other words, it's any entity that files with a state repository for entity formation.
Gotcha.
So Kim, right now, if you went down to the county clerk's office, you as Kim Hughes could just go do a DBA, but you file with the county. You're not filing with the state. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay.
Therefore, you are not subject. It's only for those entities that are using the states to form their businesses.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. And let me just kind of piggyback on what you said earlier, is that Lucy is in the state of Texas. So if you're in the state of Texas and you don't have an attorney, you don't have a CPA, she could be somebody you reach out to. But if you live in another state, again, call your Treasury Department, call your lawyer, call your CPA that's in that state to get what you have to do. Even though this is federal, you still need to know, and you still need to do it in your state. So I just want to make sure that, you don't get a call from California asking you to help them with this because you couldn't, so Lucy only is talking about Texas, but it is a federal thing.
That is absolutely correct, Kim. And that brings up another interesting point that you mentioned. This law is a federal law. So it applies to the United States and all the LLCs and corporations. Now, states, before this law was passed, individual states did not have this same type of monitoring requirement. But guess what? This law was passed in 2021, and it's just now coming into effect in 2024. So there are several states that have already set up sort of piggyback state requirements wanting the same type of information filed with the states. So those states would be New York already has that, as well as California. So who knows?
Okay.
But it's a huge burden for those of us who have a small business.
Yeah.
More thing that we've got to worry about, because if we don't get these reports filed and they're not filed in a timely manner, the penalties are substantial. $500.
Yeah. So let's go ahead. So
The,
let's go over those penalties and those deadlines, because to me, when you were telling me that in yoga, I was like, oh my gosh, we got to get on this.
yes. So the penalties are pretty stiff. If you do not file this initial report, and also if you do not notify FinCEN of changes to any of your board, ownership, residence addresses, or anything, there's additional requirements on that too. But it's a $500 a day fine for each entity and jail time, up to 2 years in jail. I don't know how FinCEN is going to monitor 32 to 40 million LLCs in this country, LLCs and corporations. But believe me, if there's a way, they're gonna find it, right?
They'll do it.
And
Yeah.
they're
They'll
going
do
to
it.
have to enforce it, and they're going to cross-reference everybody and everything. So you
Mm.
do want to make sure, if you're listening out there and you got an LLC or a corporation, please make sure that you comply with this act. Yeah, your business partners, your family, your friends are going to thank you for it.
Hmm. So what would the deadline be for 2024? So if I've been in business for 24 years and I'm an LLC, then, and I'm in the state of Texas, so when would my deadline be and how much is that fee?
Okay, so there's no fee to electronically file this report, as far as I know. I don't think I've seen the
Okay.
final regulations on this. As you know, because this is brand new, there may be some implementing regulations that go along with it. From what I understand, there's no cost to do this other than having to go to your CPA or your attorney in order to electronically file. But here's the deal. If you have an entity that's already been formed before 2020, January 1st of 2020, if you have an existing entity that's been on file this whole time, no, I take that back. If you have a current entity that's in existence as of right now, if it's an active LLC, your deadline for filing will be next year, December 31st of 2024. The window will open for filing on January 1st of 2024. Does that make sense? So
24 or 25?
24. So current
Okay.
LLCs who are active will have all of next year to make this filing. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
If you're
Yeah.
an active entity, LLC or corporation, you can start your registration, your e-filing, beginning January the 1st of 2024, and you have all the way
Mm-hmm.
through the end of 2024. But don't wait to the last minute, because you know what
Right.
happens. Systems go down. But at least you got a nice buffer. And hopefully there'll be time enough to educate everybody that this is what you're going to be subject to. Now, the rules are
Mm-hmm.
different for inactive entities. If you have an entity that was formed January the 1st of 2020 up till now, and you haven't done anything with it, it hasn't transacted more than $1,000 in any given time, it's just been sitting on a shelf, you have an additional time to file.
Okay.
But again, my recommendation is go ahead and tank those. Just get rid of them because you don't want to get any letter from the IRS or FinCEN in the mail.
Right.
Those entities going forward, all right, if you're going to file next year in 2024, you're going to form an LLC or a corporation. Here's the deal. As soon as you form your entity with the state by doing the state filing, whatever it is in your state, you have 90 days to get your report on file. So that's a very short time frame for businesses. And again, those are only for new entities formed after January 1st of 2024.
Okay.
90 days. And if you don't make that 90 days, you are out of compliance with the CTA and you run the risk of being subject to the $500 per day fine up to 2 years in jail. Now,
So go ahead. Go ahead.
then if you make any changes next year to your current active entity or your new entity, so from January 2024 going forward, if you have any change in ownership, any change in residence of your beneficial owners or those with substantial control, you have 90 days to update with FinCEN by electronic filing. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and you got a lot of people, a lot of us in our age are going in between two homes, maybe in different states. They'll go season for summer, they'll go up north. For summer, they'll go to Florida. You're going to have to pick a primary residence and go ahead and file that primary residence. But if you maintain two of them, good luck, my friend.
Oh, wow.
You may get a letter from FinCEN. So the best advice is, hey, go ahead, take care of your business, know where you are at this point in time with your LLC. Is it active? Is it not active? If it's not active, go ahead and take care of it. Just get rid of it. Not only do you want to do that, you want to tank it with the state. You want to send the letter to the IRS, to FinCEN, letting them know, hey, this entity is no longer viable. It has been dissolved. We're not using the EIN number, but go ahead and talk to your bank, any institution you've done business with monetarily, PayPal, Zelle, whatever these little online applications are. Let them know, hey, this business is no longer active. It's been dissolved. It's been terminated, and we're no longer going to use this EIN number. For new entities going forward that start next year, if you're thinking about forming a new business in 2024, it's going to be an LLC. One of the things you may now face is, you know how you go to the bank and open up a corporate bank account or a bank account for the entity? Right. Don't be surprised if the bank says to you, before we can do this, we need proof that you filed your report with FinCEN. Where's your BIR? So there's all these little extra considerations you need to be thinking of going forward if you're operating an LLC or a corporation. Now, one of the things we did not talk about, you want me to go ahead and talk about the exceptions to this act?
Yeah, let me ask you two things first. I'm listening to you and taking notes. So if I am an LLC in 23, and then I'm going into 24 as an LLC, but I'm planning to retire in 2024 and dissolve the LLC, do you still have to file and then turn around and dissolve the LLC all at once? Or how do you know how that would work?
So there haven't been, like I said, there haven't been a lot of implementing regulations, as is common with big pieces of legislation, because they got to think about all these little details and the nuances. But I would always encourage you, if you know you've got this whole period of time from January 1 of next year through December 31st, if you're going to go ahead and you know you're going to tank your LLC or do away with it, you are perfectly okay to go ahead and do that. And then you are off the hook for the
Okay.
reporting requirement. But just keep in mind, Kim, if you have that EIN number for the LLC, if you tank the entity, send a letter to the IRS letting them know, hey, I have dissolved this entity. It's no longer legally active. It's been terminated, and I will no longer be using this EIN number that's associated with it. Because
Okay.
what they're going to do is they're going to cross-reference everything. You know you've tanked it, right? Next year,
Yeah. Right.
but the IRS won't know. So that's just a little tip that I would tell people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then the second question is, I know that if we don't file by the December 24, we will be penalized on a daily basis of $500, and then there's jail time. Is there a fee to file the CTA? Is there any, like, when you send in that paperwork, do you have to send them a check or anything like that?
No, because again, as far as what I've been reading from all the white papers from the law firms, the American Bar Association has written about this extensively. There is no fee per se for going online and filing the BIR, the Beneficial
Okay.
Information Report. There's no fee for that. The fee is going to be if you pay someone to do it for you, your
Okay.
CPA, your attorney, or some of these outfits that are now popping up, taking advantage of this really high volume of reporting that's going to have to be done. This
Mhm.
entity that I mentioned, if you look online, there are law firms who will do it for $200 for you. But
Okay.
there's no cost or charge to do your filing online of the BIR, the Beneficial Information Report.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes. So basically, you're just paying somebody to do it for you unless you do it yourself. And we don't
Yes.
advise you to do it yourself, so make sure that you either talk to an attorney or talk to your CPA, talk to your state to get the full information that you need to handle it. So what we're doing here is just giving you this information, because literally I have not heard anybody talk about this until you and I were at yoga.
Well, and
And
I don't
so,
know if you noticed, there's very few podcasts out there too, because I
yeah,
do my research for my clients and I'm like, oh, whoa, I had not heard about this.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So yeah, so let's talk about well, let me ask you the other question. On the BIR, which is the Beneficial Information Report, is that once you file it, is it public record so I could go and look at whoever's, or is that secure?
So that is a great question, Kim. I was asking myself that, and I know your listeners are probably thinking the same thing. No, this is not a public database. This is still going to be private information, just like when you file your tax return with the IRS, and only
Mm-hmm.
certain individuals have access to it through the government. This is a private, huge database. So the only ones that are going to
Okay.
have access to this will be the IRS, Department of the Treasury, certain state law enforcement and federal law enforcement, people who are doing the tracking of the money, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and banking institutions. So only those entities, and again, they have very strict requirements on how those entities can even obtain the information. But again,
Okay.
this is an anti-money laundering law, and it's meant to try and weed out and track the bad guys from the good guys. So
Okay.
if you're worried about that, I've heard people already say, well, hey, the government already knows everything about you anyway. You file
Yeah.
your taxes, they know where you live, they know your social security number.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they may not have your driver's license, but I know I do a lot of filings with the US Patent and Trademark Office, and we also do the filings online. And there's a very complicated procedure you have to go through to be able to use their online filing system. It's a secured website. I had to put a copy of my driver's license on there. So,
Wow.
they've got most of the information on all of us good
Yeah.
guys anyway.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has our information. It's just, it's kind of like my husband and I were talking about, when TikTok first came out. Oh, don't put it on your phone. They'll be able to track all your data. And I'm like, everybody else is already tracking that data. It's the attention that you draw to yourself that makes them tap into that data,
That's
And so I'm like,
right.
if you're out there acting like a crazy person, yeah, they're going to tap into that data.
Exactly.
But like my husband said, if they it's kind of like the Alexis that you have in your home, they hear everything. And it's like if my husband said, if they have nothing better to do than to listen in to us, bless their hearts. And I'm like, they probably pop in every now and then, but
Yeah.
what are you
Well,
gonna do?
we never know. Um,
Yeah.
so the exceptions, I don't know. There is a whole list of exceptions to this act, a lot of which are not going to apply to you, me, or your listeners, but they're all
Okay.
sophisticated, large entities like securities, exchange people, insurance companies, broker dealers, Exchange Act registered entities, banks, domestic government authorities, public utilities, the list goes on and on. But
Right.
there's two that may impact your listeners. One is the big corporation exception. And that is if
Okay.
you've got, let me make sure I got this, 20 or more full-time employees, or you gross $5 million in revenues, operational revenues per year. So if
Hmm.
that's what you are not subject to the act. You still have to file the report and click we're exempt, but you're not subject to anything else. The second
Okay.
exemption that may apply to some of your listeners is what they call the inactive entity exemption. And like I mentioned before, if you had an entity that was already in existence before January 1, 2020, which is when this law was conjured up, if that entity did no business, had no change in ownership, no monetary dealings, no assets, or no transactions of $1,000 or more in the last 12 months, then guess what? You
Mhm.
can hit that exempt button, check the button,
Okay.
send off your BIR, and you should be good. But my tip, this humble tip from this one attorney is if you do that, send a letter to the IRS and let them know, hey, this is an inactive
Mm.
entity. I filed my report. Don't mess with me. Don't send me anything
Yeah.
because you're going to be on
So
their
not
radar
only
list.
file it, but let the IRS know, because if the state may not tell the IRS, so you've got to tell the IRS as well. And
That's right.
then, do you have to file this every year, or is it a one time and done thing?
So I have seen conflicting information on this. I'm going to go and say that this is a one-time filing that you do initially with your entity, but then keep in mind, if anything changes as far as ownership changes, owner managers, the people, if they move, if the percentage of ownership changes, that all needs to be updated within 90 days of any change in that information,
Okay.
with that one little
Okay.
caveat.
All right. Well, then, what else do we need to talk about to give everybody information on this? Have we left anything out?
I think we
Because
covered
this is so
everything.
important.
We covered what the CTA, the Corporate Transparency Act is, and it's just a tool that the government is going to put everybody in a big database. If you're an LLC or a corporation, you need to make sure that in addition to doing your state maintenance filings, that now you're going to have a new federal filing, and you have to disclose substantial ownership or 25% ownership of all the people associated with your entity. We talked about the penalties for non-compliance, and they are
Mhm.
grave. Um, we talked about the couple of exceptions to the act. And the last thing would be just practical tips for your listeners would be check the status of your entity. Number one, know where you
Mhm.
are. If it's old, go ahead and take care of it, tank it, close it down legally through your state. Notify the IRS it's been tanked and you won't be using the EIN number. Close out any bank accounts associated with that number because you just don't want to be on their radar. And then again, if you do have
Right.
an entity and you're doing business or you plan to do business next year, talk to your CPA, talk to your attorney, make sure that you're in compliance with this CTA. We sure as heck don't want to see anyone in orange jumpsuits over the
No,
this
no,
huge
or
act.
striped or anything. So
Yes.
here's a question. If I have if I am a small business entrepreneur and I have more than one bank account associated with my LLC, do I need to give each bank a copy of that
The
what do we call it?
BIR.
BIR. So each bank has to have a copy of that on record as well, most likely.
I would say so that you're prepared, you can anticipate that the banks may ask for that with respect to any
Okay.
entity or account that you have. And just
Okay.
make sure you provide that so that there's no glitches or hangups with your
Right.
banking and your ability to transact business.
Okay. And then this I always look at things as there is no stupid question. So I'm going to ask this question. If I have my business credit card with another bank, so let's say I bank over here, but my credit card is with this bank, do I need to supply that credit card bank with that BIR?
I don't think I would provide that, Kim, unless it was asked for.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
that is just, I don't know how they're going to do the certificate that you've complied with this. I don't even know if that's been thought about, but there's got to be some proof. You know how you send off your tax return and CPAs have some sort of receipt that they get. I'm assuming
Right.
that you may have the same sort of information. And if that is nothing
Mhm.
more than a generic Kim Hughes and here's her LLC and she's complied, that's one thing. I wouldn't hesitate to give
Right.
that out, but if it's got your personal identifying information, I would
Hmm.
hold that close to me.
Hold on.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's talking about the confidential stuff is you think that, like if you're sitting in public and you're talking to someone, and I'll give you a perfect example. It's funny, but it's not funny. It made me realize people are listening, but I had something taken from me without knowing about it. It was through my grocery store. You know how grocery stores give you the thank you cards and you earn points and all of that. So, my local grocery store, you get gas points. So, I told my husband, I said, you've got like X amount of points. You need to go use them before the end of the month, blah, blah, blah. He went up there, came back, and he goes, there was like no points available. He goes, are you sure? And I pulled out my receipt and showed it to him. I said, that's crazy. So I called the grocery store. They said, oh, well, call this number, called that number, and they pulled it up on their records. And, we live in Mineola, and the town that those points were used in was an hour away. But they said, most likely, they said, we see this all the time that people, like if you're in the stand, if you're checking out, oh, what's your thank you card number? And you give them your phone number. And then
Wow.
they tell you how many points you have out loud. And it made me realize somebody heard me give out my phone number,
And
went to another town to use those points for gas, which I mean, I look at it this way. Yeah, they shouldn't have done it. It was stealing. But at the same time, I pray that those people are the ones that really needed the gas. You know what I mean? And
wow.
so we had to change our number. They were polite enough to give us our points back. They didn't have to do that, but we changed our number. And now I have created a card. So when I go somewhere and somebody wants my private information, I give them that card and I tell them, don't repeat anything because people are listening. And
Exactly.
they think I'm crazy, but I'm like, I'd rather be looked at like I'm crazy than somebody steal my identity. you know.
Certainly.
So just be careful when you're looking at companies that offer to do this type of filing for you, and make sure they're legit. I'm always going to be the one that says, call your attorney, call your CPA. If you don't have one, then find somebody locally that knows what they're doing and ask them about this. And I would say, even because we put the show notes with the podcast, print out your show notes and use this as a guideline when you're talking to attorney, talking to CPA, talking to the state, to get your information, because all we're doing is giving you the information, and then we're expecting you to take it and do what you're supposed to do with it legally. So
Exactly.
this is FYI. It's very important. So I hope that everybody that's listening understands the importance of this and the repercussions if you don't follow through. So you're going to be doing mine. So so okay. So is there anything else that I'm looking at my notes? I think we've covered everything. Have you thought of anything maybe we haven't covered?
I think we've covered pretty much everything. Just make sure your driver's license and your passports are all up to date and current, so they're not expired, because they won't accept
Yeah.
expired personal identification information. That, and check the
Okay.
status of your entity wherever you're at. I think I gave the phone number for the Texas Secretary of State's office.
Yeah.
You can always go to the website here in Texas also. That is sos.state.tx.us. You can check certain information with the Texas Secretary of State's office on that website also.
Okay. Now, this is all applying to Texas. So if you are in another state, which most likely you are, then you need to call your state and find out what you're supposed to do. Even though this is a federal, you still need to talk to your state to make sure everything is agreeable to what federal is asking. And okay, well, I think we've given them enough information. Hopefully they'll take this seriously. And, it's just one of those things where, as an entrepreneur, you're trying to do everything. Sometimes you're one person running the show, and put this on the top of your list. Do not wait until October 1st to do this.
Yes, and
You know,
please
I'm
don't
going to,
wait to December 30th to do it.
oh, good Lord. I mean, if anybody understands, and I think everybody does, that once October comes, it's holiday time, and people get
Yes.
so wrapped up in the holidays. You're probably going to be sick because your kids just went back to school, so now they're bringing home all the germs. Make sure you do this early so that you don't forget, or something prevents you from doing it, and then you're being fined $500 a day. A
I would
day.
I would echo that. I can't emphasize that enough, Kim. That is such prudent advice. If you're like me, if you tried to get a CPA to talk to you right now, or an attorney at this time
Yeah.
of year, good luck. Don't wait till the last minute. Be
Mhm.
proactive, do your due diligence. If you have an attorney or CPA who doesn't know what this law is, and it's scary, but there's attorneys out there who have never heard of
Yeah.
this. Find one who does, who can take care of your entity for you so that you are in compliance.
Yeah. Totally agree. Thank you so much. You are always full of information for me, and you keep me, when you tell me something, I'm like, I come straight home, write it down, and I'm like, okay, we got to do this.
Well,
And so,
I feel kind of bad, Kim, because you're always telling people, how to build their business, how to market themselves, how to save money, how to be more organized. And here I am telling you how not to go to jail. I mean, it's not very
yeah,
sexy.
it's not sexy, but it's the reality of our world. And so just be compliant. And I know, as a real estate agent, because I've worked with y'all for 30 years, um, don't wait till the last minute, because it will give you a headache. And if you're another business and you're listening to this podcast, make sure you check into it. This applies to every small business, every entrepreneur, anybody that owns an EIN number or an LLC or a corporation. So, like I said, I would appreciate it if everybody would take this seriously, share the information, share the podcast, whatever you have to do to keep your friends and your family from getting into a situation that they may not have heard about until the last minute. Because I literally have not heard about this until you and I talked.
Until yoga class.
Yeah, and yoga. I mean, you would think it would be on the news. It would be from the, the IRS would be sending out emails, the state would be doing something, but they're not. So you've got to take care of yourself, in this situation.
Well said.
All right, lady. Well, thank you again so much for your time, your knowledge. I really think this is the most important podcast I've done yet.
Oh, wow.
And it'll be starred for sure. And it'll be repeated multiple times for people to get it out there. So, all right. And so with that said, thank you so much. I appreciate you so much. And anything else that you have that we need to know about, you just let me know and we'll pull you back onto the podcast and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim, so much. It was a pleasure visiting with you about this important big law for our small businesses. Thanks again.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you know someone, and I bet you do, who would appreciate this podcast, please share it with them. As a reminder, this podcast can be delivered directly to your favorite device by using the subscribe links you can find in the show notes below or over at unstoppablerealestateagents.com. Remember, it takes as much energy to wish as it does to plan. Have a great day.